When Sergeant Michael Donovan first saw the jagged mountains of Afghanistan from the window of the C-17 transport plane, he felt as though he were staring into the bones of the earth itself. The peaks looked ancient and merciless, the sun burning over them like a hard white flame. It was 2009, the height of the U.S. campaign in Helmand province, and Michael had been deployed twice before, once in Iraq and once in eastern Afghanistan. But this felt different. The valley below was a maze of shadows, cracked villages, and endless stretches of desert that seemed to breathe heat. As the plane descended toward the dusty airstrip at Camp Leatherneck, he gripped the edge of his seat, his knuckles pale beneath the desert-tin gloves, his thoughts flickering between duty and dread. He was 27, a soldier of the United States Army's 10th Mountain Division, but at that moment, he felt smaller than he ever had, a speck of dust falling into an ancient storm. The heat hit him like a living wall when he stepped off the plane. It wasn't just hot, it was consuming. The air shimmered, carrying the smell of jet fuel, dust, and sweat. Around him, other soldiers cursed and adjusted their gear, their boots crunching over gravel. Helicopters thundered in the distance, kicking up spirals of sand that drifted like ghostly curtains. Michael slung his rifle over his shoulder and followed his unit toward the tents. He could feel the weight of Afghanistan immediately, not just in the terrain, but in the tension that hung in the air. This was not a place of peace. Every shadow, every movement in the distance could mean life or death. The local children stared at them from behind fences, their expressions unreadable, some waving half-heartedly, others glaring with eyes that seemed older than their years. The first few days were a blur of routine and exhaustion. The unit was stationed near a small outpost outside Sanjin, tasked with patrolling the surrounding villages and monitoring Tau. The winter crept slowly into Helmand, wrapping the desert in a cold that felt alien after months of relentless heat. The air grew sharper, the nights longer, and the silence heavier. The winds carried not only the chill but whispers, rumors of a Taliban resurgence in the surrounding valleys. Michael Donovan's unit, worn thin from months of patrols and casualties, was reassigned to a new operation known as Iron Dusk, a mission meant to cut off insurgent supply routes snaking through the Sanjin Valley. Officially, it was a stabilization effort. Unofficially, everyone knew it was a hunt, one that would drag them deep into enemy territory, far from the relative safety of their outpost. Michael sat in the dim tent as Captain Harris briefed them. The map spread across the table was dotted with red circles, potential IED zones, ambush points, suspected hideouts. The captain's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. "We'll move at dawn. No air support once we're inside the valley. Too many civilians. We go in quiet, we come out alive." The men nodded, some muttering under their breath. Michael's gaze drifted to the photograph pinned inside his notebook. His sister Emily, grinning under the Vermont snow. The contrast felt cruel. Here, snow meant death. It meant mines hidden beneath the frost, roads turning to sludge, weapons freezing in the night. They set out before sunrise. The convoy rumbled along a narrow dirt road that wound between cliffs and dry riverbeds. The light was gray and uncertain, painting everything in muted shades of war. Michael rode in the second vehicle, his rifle resting across his lap, his breath fogging the glass. Private Jenkins sat beside him, chewing gum nervously. "You ever get used to this?" the kid asked, his voice trembling despite the attempt to sound casual. Michael gave a small, tired smile. "No one does. You just stop waiting to feel safe." Jenkins nodded, silent after that. By mid-morning, they reached the edge of a small. When Sergeant Michael Donovan finally stepped off the plane at Fort Drum, New York, the cold wind that swept across the tarmac felt unreal. It was sharper than the desert wind, clean and alive, carrying the scent of pine instead of dust. Yet, as it touched his skin, he didn't feel comfort. He felt confusion. After 12 months in Afghanistan, the war had become part of his nervous system. Every sudden sound made him flinch, every shadow stretched too long. Around him, families were crying, cheering, clinging to returning soldiers. Michael stood among them, smiling awkwardly as Emily threw her arms around him. "You're home," she whispered. Her voice trembled with relief, but when he hugged her back, his arms felt heavy, mechanical, as if his body had forgotten how to feel warmth. The drive home to Vermont was quiet. Emily talked about school, friends, and college applications, trying to fill the silence, but Michael barely responded. He stared out the window, watching the snow-covered fields pass by like frozen memories. Their father had passed away 2 years earlier, leaving only the two of them in the old farmhouse near Lake Champlain. It should have felt peaceful, a homecoming, but to Michael, the house seemed too quiet, the walls too thin. That first night, when he lay in his old bed, the silence became unbearable. He could hear the faint ticking of the clock, the creak of the wood, and in his mind, it all transformed into echoes of distant gunfire, the rhythmic thud of helicopters. He sat up, drenched in sweat, his hands shaking. Home wasn't home anymore. It was just another kind of battlefield, invisible, endless, internal. The following weeks blurred together. The Army gave him leave, counseling, and a transition checklist full of promises: therapy, reintegration, career support. But no checklist could teach him how to be ordinary again. He tried to help Emily around the house, but even simple things felt foreign. The sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. It had been 8 years since Sergeant Michael Donovan left Afghanistan. The world had changed, or at least it pretended to. The news no longer spoke of the war. The headlines had moved on to other conflicts, other tragedies. But for Michael, Afghanistan never truly ended. It lingered in his bones, in the smell of sand that returned in dreams, in the sound of helicopters that seemed to echo faintly in his ears even when he stood beneath Vermont's quiet sky. He had built a new life, small, steady, and humble. He worked as a counselor for veterans, teaching them how to navigate the same darkness he had once nearly drowned in. But somewhere deep inside, he knew there was one thing left undone, a ghost he had to face, not for closure, but for peace. In 2021, when the United States began its final withdrawal from Afghanistan, Michael felt something stir within him, a mix of sorrow and unfinished duty. He watched the images on television, desperate crowds at the airport, soldiers burning documents, helicopters lifting off into the smoke-stained sky. It felt like watching a dream unravel. Emily found him sitting silently in front of the TV one night, his jaw tight, his eyes hollow. "You can't go back there," she said softly. He didn't answer. But a week later, he told her he had joined a humanitarian group working with displaced Afghan families along the border. "I need to see it one more time," he said. She tried to protest, but she saw something in his eyes, not recklessness, not obsession, but a quiet necessity. She hugged him tightly, as if afraid he might disappear again. "Then come back," she whispered. "Promise me you'll come back this time." He promised, though both of them knew that promises in war had a way of breaking. When he stepped off the plane in Kabul that autumn, the city was almost unrecognizable. The old base where he once lived was gone, reclaimed by dust and silence. The roads were crowded with families fleeing, traders shouting, soldiers from